I've got a huge hang up with this in that we had a referendum many years ago. We're still talking about it. Can't we let it go? It's done.
Someone likened it to jumping in a taxi and shouting drive. It's a pretty flimsy excuse if you're going to pin all the sector's ails on that one thing that happened a decade ago. I think we've probably just got to get on with it.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with Adobe Acrobat.
Ryan, we're back. There's no King of the North anymore. It looks like he's going to be King of the Kingdom. So do you fancy that position maybe?
I don't think there's going to be a vacancy, mate. It sounds like he's doing both jobs. I heard there was a quote yesterday about it's the first prime minister that's effectively trying to do themselves out of a role by devolving it all to the regions. But number 10 North's going to be interesting, isn't it? As construction jobs go, I don't know if that. I don't know who's going to be up for that one, but watch this space, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to throw your hat into the ring at some point for something. It's not that you wear that many hats, I don't think. But
it's not me being coy. A construction disrupted exclusive. I've yet to have an approach made. That's not to say I'm not open. It's just that as of now, nobody has approached me.
Yeah, and your contract to Construction Disrupted is watertight. I just thought
whatever happens, I'm here, Pete. I'll find a cabinet post for you somewhere, mate.
Brilliant. Yeah. And by cabinet post, he means building cabinets more than ministerial.
Naturally.
Yeah. Naturally. Right. Okay. Let's get on with things, shall we?
Well, we'll stay on politics, I guess. We've, of the construction disrupted buzzword bingo we've been playing in recent weeks. AI has been up there. 1.5 million homes has been up there. Infrastructure has been up there. Brexit hasn't. I think it's been one of those buzzwords within sort of common parlance for the last decade. Obviously, we've just gone past the 10-year marker, and construction news keeping it front and center with a piece from last week. Now, I will say, as a slight behind the curtains peek as to the preparation for this show, I hope you don't mind me sharing, people. You did mention dispatches when we were picking stories for this week that you thought you and I might clash on this one. So do you want to intro and explain why you think that might be the case?
Yeah, all right. Okay, so I've got a huge hang up with this in that we had a referendum many years ago, and like we're still talking about it. Can't we let it go? It's done. It's in the past. It is what it is. And that's kind of my stance. For full transparency, I actually voted Remain because of where I live, and we have had that investment from Europe in the past. But it just feels like we're not going to let it go until we're either back in the European Union or something happens. My other part of the hang up here, before we actually get into the story, is that the first line of this news story is nearly 6 in 10 construction professionals believe the UK was wrong to leave the European Union. And this is a YouGov survey of 136 construction professionals. I just don't think that's a valid number to make that 6 in 10 statement. I just don't know. I'm here to be proven wrong, but this was a larger survey of which construction professionals were part of it. So I'm just seeing that part in isolation. But yeah, now I've aired my laundry out in public. I'd like to get your take on this one.
Well, I'm trying to think whether there's any clients that I've run surveys of similar samples for, and whether I've declared their levels of statistical significance before I go down that particular route. I think the one thing that stuck out for me, it's the 10-year anniversary, so I guess that's the topicality element. I think part of the reason that we're, in answer to your point as to why this is being discussed, is that things haven't improved an awful lot. I think if we'd have had, and again, there's been pandemics, there's been wars, there's been various other kind of macroeconomic things. We've played musical chairs with prime ministers. I think we're on shortly to be on our 7th over that period, but certainly 6 in that time, which is unheard of. If you think prior to that, we spoke about it last week. The likes of Cameron and Blair and so on had, over a decade each. As a decent run to sort of make something happen that had a bit more long-term viability to it. So, yeah, it's is that cause and effect? Is it Brexit that has made those things happen, and therefore we've ended up where we've ended up, or is it that economically things have been so bad that Brexit becomes a scapegoat for those things. I think you'd make an argument either way. I'm with you to some extent in that I think the conversation hasn't moved on from whatever your opinion was the day that you voted, by and large. I would
Mm.
be interested to understand, of those almost 6 in 10, so I would guess a smidge over 50%, what, how did they vote at the time? What were their thoughts on it at the time? It feels like most people have kind of calcified in whatever their thinking was. And it's funny, slight spoiler alert, but in our second story, we'll talk again about the European Union and regulatory alignment and so on, and the impacts of that. But yeah, I don't think we've moved on. I really don't think we've moved on. I think as a sector, there is still so much. The decoupling process is still going on. So I don't think we've fully got independence as a sector, regardless of what anybody else says, because there's still so many regulations that are directly in line. And again, spoiler alert, we're bleeding into the second story a little bit, but in lots of quarters, there's no plans to move on from that. Now it's a tricky one because you're going to have businesses that, mainly from a product point of view, but from a service point of view, and others that are multinational headquartered, people that trade with Europe and need that frictionless trade and need that regulatory alignment and so on. And I suspect that's something that's going to continue and grow under Burnham's government when it happens. But yeah, there is an element to this of, I just think it's people that are hoping for change and hoping for growth. And I think had that have happened sooner, then Brexit becomes a bit of a non-event and we do move on from it. But I think the longer that we're in stasis and the longer that things are kind of stagnating, the more that's going to be something to point back to. Yeah, then what your thoughts are on that one?
The numbers are just too. I don't say I just say weak, but it's 6 in 10. You said just over half. Lo and behold, what got us into what got us out?
Exactly. Yeah.
Just over half. And is that a valid number? Split 50-50,
Mm.
50.001% gets you out of something, or the opposite gets you remaining. It's just the numbers in all of this just seem so weak, and I think, like you said, it harks to we haven't moved on, and if there was another referendum, it could be 52% one way or
Yeah.
49 one way, or whatever it is. But within this story, it actually goes on to say things like, um, people are saying that prices have increased because of Brexit, um, and that might not be the case. It could be for various other um, larger factors, that the wars that we know have been going on, etc., and blockades and things like that, increasing prices. So it's probably a huge mixture. But the thing that pointed out to me is, like, you start with the headline and then that comment of 6 in 10, so that means we would have remained. But then you have authoritative thought leaders like Nobel Francis from the CPA saying that the majority of loss of skilled construction workers since 2019 has not been due to Brexit.
Mm.
So it's easy to point it to this one singular thing which has changed things or not changed things, if whichever way you want to look at it. But it is that stagnation, which I think that's not going to sell headlines, is it? Nothing's changed. Move on.
Yeah.
But it just feels like the
Yeah. So sorry, I completely agree, Pete. And I think if I was going to play devil's advocate even further, we've had sort of short periods of growth within that 10-year. I'm thinking particularly extreme set of circumstances, not one that I think anyone would be keen to repeat anytime soon. But coming out of COVID, there was a bit of a false dawn there, 21, 22 of kind of increased investment and spend and so on, that kind of pent up demand. So it can be done. Yeah, it's just not being sustained. And I would say the other thing is, if you step out and look at the UK construction sector and wider economy in the context of what other nations have been doing, we're not outliers. There are a couple of other nations that are growing faster. The US,
Mhm.
particularly, I think we've spoken about in recent weeks when we've looked at broader economic trends. But I'm thinking a couple of weeks back, in the confidence of infrastructure investors, if you recall that the survey that we were looking at, the UK is outperforming many other European nations that are still part of the EU. So I don't think it is as simple as this happened and therefore this. There's very little evidence that I've seen to say it would have been all roses and kind of continuous growth. Like I said, I think there's just desperation for an answer from somewhere. Again, without making this politics disrupted.
Mm.
Interesting some of the commentary off the back of Burnham's speech yesterday. There's a bit more detail now to what he's going to look to do. And it looks like we've spoken before about his devolved plan for Manchester. It looks like that at scale. Obviously, the council house building program and so on. I don't know. Not to get hung up on the vibe seems to be the phrase that gets used a lot, but yeah, well, we kind of talk ourselves into a bit of a doom loop an awful lot. I think
Mm.
particularly in construction. So yeah, let's hope that this is something that breaks that. And yeah, I think if we have some sustained growth, then Brexit becomes less of a talking point. But the longer that malaise continues, the more that you are going to be inclined to sort of point back to that. But yeah, as you say, if you think of the things that have probably influenced most within construction, as the article points out, international labour, cross-border supply chains, investor confidence, etc. Yeah, we know that those are issues, but we need to be building pockets of resilience. We talk about training and skills often enough anyway. If it was international labour that was propping us up, that was probably not an entirely healthy situation anyway. If people were genuine economic migrants, then there was always the chance that they would move on to apply that labour elsewhere anyway. I know we would lost quite a lot of people to the Middle East, to Australia, to other markets there that emerged and grown faster than ours. So that's always flimsy anyway, isn't it? We have to make sure that medium term sustainable supply chain is there. So yeah, if
Mm.
Brexit wasn't there, then it was probably papering over the cracks anyway. So 10 years is enough time to sort of lick your wounds and get on with it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And working with some reputable firms that were really close to certification and accreditation many years ago, when things started to move and we had to sort things out in terms of what those certifications would look like for the UK and not for the European Union, and a lot of it was like for like.
Mm.
Very much it's just the same. And I know it takes a long time to pass these bills and laws and things like that, and rightly so, to make sure that they're bang right. But when you're replacing like for like and something as monumental as this, you'd think there'd be a bit of speed, but it's almost like dragging your heels as if it hasn't happened,
Do you know what?
or hoping that it would change in some way, shape, or form.
Well, I get, because I think this will lead us on to our second story quite nice. So not to be a massive hypocrite and say it's time to move on and then bellyache about Brexit. But one of my sort of lasting frustrations, and there's nothing you can do about it now, but the Scottish referendum, the yes vote as it was, had to effectively produce an incredibly detailed guide to what life in independent Scotland
Mm.
would look like, and here's how all of that would work out. Or you've got the status quo, and then the electorate made a very informed decision as to which direction. I think I'm not a big fan of referenda anyway. I think making things a binary yes, no. How often do we speak, Pete, about being a grown up and not having these kind of diametrically opposed binary choices between two very, very complex things? Having a leave or remain thing and identifying as that and building politics around that, I think was such a corrosive thing anyway.
Mhm.
But the fact that there wasn't, this is what an independent Britain will look like, or a non-EU Britain will look like in all of this detail. Here's how we're going to handle things like products and regulation and regulatory alignment and so on. It was just leave, remain, and then Brexit means Brexit, whatever that. I still don't know what that means. And then yeah, we were left to that fudge, and I think, yeah, if anything, that's the element of all of it that frustrates me the most is that yeah, there wasn't a clear someone likened it to jumping in a taxi and shouting drive. Yeah, but again, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, and yeah, as it happens, you are absolutely right. It will lead us on to our second story quite nicely, but there's still so much regulatory alignment. We're outperforming many European nations anyway in terms of attractiveness of investment and GDP and so on. So yeah, it's a pretty flimsy excuse if you're going to pin all the sector's ails on that one thing that happened a decade ago. I think we've probably just got to get on with it.
Yeah, and speaking of getting on with it, just want to pause, mention our partner, Adobe Acrobat. They've done a lot for us, and not just supporting us in terms of a partnership. We couldn't do this podcast without PDF Spaces, and what that allows us to do is choose our 3 headlines import those web links into a PDF space, and it actually analyzes and draws out the key stats, the key figures, the key lines and information, which allows us to go over each story in detail. Then we have that as show notes. We have it as a guide for when we're talking now. We have it so we can ask it to create LinkedIn posts and a whole host of things. And it is like your own vault of information, which you can pull from and also ask questions using AI Assistant. Please check out PDF Spaces. It saves us so much time for this podcast. And I really don't think it would be possible to do this. Once again, thank you for being our partners and thank you for letting us prattle on for about half an hour each week.
No, absolutely. It's been a godsend. Certainly the last couple of weeks, hasn't it? It's been a busy one. Thank you again to Adobe.
Right, on to a similar but different story, do you think?
I think so. Yeah, there's definitely overlap. I guess one of the things that's fallen out of Brexit has been about, in a general sense, alignment on standards and legislation and so on. Everyone remember the Northern Ireland question, and sort of frictionless borders and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, construction, as I said before, one of the things, it's not unique to us, but we are certainly a sector that trades across borders, principally in product, but also in services, in labour, and so on. And it's the product side of things that we're going to focus on now, and maybe something that we haven't done an awful lot of in recent weeks. I'll declare an interest. It's an area that I've been particularly interested in. We have a lot of clients that are product manufacturers, and I've been very close to the CCPI, or Code for Construction Product Information process, post Grenfell. So for anyone not aware, one of the things that came out in the Grenfell inquiry and subsequently the Hackett report was the role of marketing as a business discipline, in sharing product information and accurate product information, sometimes through a lack of training and awareness, and sometimes through quite nefarious means, effectively lying about product test information and so on. And so the code was developed by the Construction Products Association, principally led by Adam Turk, as a voluntary means of the sector policing itself effectively and working to standardize the way that information is dealt with, the way that information is shared is accurate and easily understood and unambiguous and so on. So that's been running for a few years now, and several manufacturers have signed up to that and started putting themselves through the process, which looks at organizational culture and commitment to health and safety and occupant well-being and all of those things, as well as the actual product information itself. So that's been happening for a while. But I remember you and I talking a little while back, Pete, about it was on the anniversary of Grenfell that Keir Starmer had said they believe the government of various shades over the period since Grenfell had adopted about 70% of the Hackett recommendations, and were looking very closely at the remaining 30. And products was one of those areas that had avoided legislation because it had been looked at on a voluntary basis. So CCPI is going to continue, and any manufacturers listening to this, anyone responsible for products information, please go and sign up. Whether you are a manufacturer, whether you're on the supply side of things, there is a role within that for you. And I think we as a sector should show that we are taking this seriously, that we're not just leaving it to government to legislate for us. But as it happens, government are legislating for us. And one of the things that I've learned, so sorry, I should jump back a little bit. There was a green paper issued last year on the government's plans for construction products regulation. That's now been formalised into white paper, which was released earlier this year. I think the consultation period for that has just closed. So government will be taking the notes from that consultation away and reviewing. Obviously, we'll have a parliamentary break for coronation of new prime minister and the usual standard summer recess. And then probably in Q4 of this year, October, November, they're looking at the formal construction products regulation legislation will be tabled in the House of Commons. One of the interesting things that it's thrown up is that we're going to have a little bit of a two-tier system, again, to throw back to our previous story around CE marking, which many people will be familiar with. But what CE marking does is it doesn't take into account product performance or product safety, just that things are aligned from a regulatory point of view with the EU. So one of the slight snags at the minute is that anything that's British manufactured for the British market will be subject to this regulation. So manufacturers will have to adhere to those. And rightly so. We should only be having safe products on the market. There should be that proof, and we should be confident in all the materials that we're using. But the same isn't true for anything that is manufactured in the EU, because anything that's coming in CE marked is just going to be accepted um, as correct, the information given. And it may well be. That isn't to say that anything coming in from Europe isn't safe or anything else. But yeah, we're talking about this off the back of a piece in Building by Paul Morrell last week. That's basically saying that there needs to be a single tier system, effectively, that is easy to understand and that can be applied across the piece. And I think he's right for what it's worth. But yeah, I guess products isn't something that we've really given a lot of love to over recent weeks and months, but something that I think is going to become increasingly a sort of topic of conversation as this gets closer to being formally legislated for towards the end of the year. So yeah, worth us getting our heads into, I think, Pete.
I think I've got to admit, this might be my favorite article so far of this year. Within every single section, he just lays it on the line with a slight bit of humor as well. And he just tells it like it is and what needs to happen. And it even starts with saying, look, this is pretty simple. Either laws and legislation and safety is for all construction products, or they're not. It's almost as simple as that. And again, working close with certification and accreditation, and going through the CE marking, the UKCA marking, and basically having them like for like. But then you're stringent on your testing houses in the UK, but not in the EU. And wouldn't Brexit be this fine, opportune time to say, okay, British products, and this isn't, I'm not saying products from abroad are any different or not as good, but isn't it that perfect time to say, right, okay, if you're coming into this country with a product, it has to be A, B, C, X, Y, Z. Like,
Yeah.
it's simple, because as we know and we've covered, there is investment in this country. There are people looking to spend money within the built environment on projects, public and private, and a mixture of both. So people want to build in this country. So it's the perfect opportunity. And doesn't that, one, help with the economy, and two, help with safety as well? But yeah, I really do love this story because I think every single section, it adds an additional element.
I think one of the biggest for me that Mr. Morrell touches on this in the piece is the benefits of standardization. We've spoken about again, back to construction disrupted bingo to a certain extent, but the big focus of sort of legislation and the Hackett report was obviously what has become the Building Safety Act and the Building Safety Regulator. And we've spoken at length about how they've been able to sort of rapidly increase the pace of their output through data standardization and things coming into them in a much easier, understandable way that means they can act on it and then approve things and move on from there. For me, that's what should be happening with products. I've spoken to architects and sort of MEP consultants that have been involved in hospital build projects, and where we've had clients attempting to be specified in this. We've got, in some cases, hundreds, if not thousands, of individual component product decisions to make. I don't have the time to sit and go through all of this information and understand every brand in this category, every product in this category. I'll make decisions based on brand, but then I will need that kind of additional reassurance. And once I've got that, I'll end up using the same systems over and over and over again. So, standardization for everyone. We don't want another Grenfell. It's such a blindingly obvious thing to say, but that's the risk, Pete. If things aren't subject to the same testing, and I don't just mean again that products are unsafe or that anyone's trying to deliberately hoodwink anyone, but if the person making the specification decision, or if it's a facilities manager that has to maintain a system long after it's been installed and the people involved have left that project, they need to have access to identical information that they can understand very, very quickly and make some sensible decisions about. And sorry, I'm tub thumping a little bit now, but it's because it's so important in my opinion. So yeah, that's kind of where I am with it. I think beyond the kind of fairness for British businesses, and yes, it is unfair for British businesses if they're subject to additional, cost and time and checks and everything else that isn't the case for European businesses. I think that there is something there from a parity point of view and a commercial sort of competitiveness point of view. But yeah, fundamentally, I want the supply chain to be able to make decisions that are better and safer and faster.
Yeah.
And I think there's an opportunity to here.
Yeah, and as we started this conversation, the industry was involved in this. The thing that there's a few things in this article that I just want to point out, and as Paul writes it, uh, he's talking about the repetition of the word growth within the document 37 times, but there isn't really any idea how that growth will come other than spouting our favorite number, say it with me, 1.5 million homes. And then he goes on to talk about, he wouldn't necessarily call it a white paper. It's more of a light green
Light
paper
green, yeah.
at the moment. But the bit that stuck out for me, again, sticking with the 1.5 million homes, if anyone's out there and they've got that more than once on the bingo card, you're going to hear it 3 times here. Uh, he's talking about the government elves have been at it again, and he's talking about the building safety regulator that sits in the heart of the government mission to support economic growth, delivering 1.5 million homes, and then he ends it with a figure that could be hardly less credible if we were to write it on the side of a bus.
There's a nice link to our previous story. Hey,
Exactly, and there's just there's so much synergy between the first story and this story, of which this all comes from Grenfell and it comes from safety, and we're still at it, like Brexit. We're still
yeah,
at it, and it's crazy. You've invited the industry in. You've made sure this is done in the proper way. Yet we've ended up what looks like, according to Paul, it ain't the proper way and it ain't working,
no.
which is
But
a bit of a head scratcher.
I will say slight controversy, Bob, and I know our remit is to be positive here, Pete.
Mm,
But I will say the industry had the chance to sort itself out with CCPI, particularly on the product manufacturer and the supply side of things. So that's been voluntary, as I said before, and part of the reason that it was lobbied and campaigned for to keep it voluntary was it was the chance for the sector to show we don't need government to bully us into doing this stuff and begrudgingly do it. We take our responsibilities seriously, and a lot of it is just good practice anyway.
mm,
Um, if you go on cpicode.org, I believe is the website, but they published a list of manufacturers and specific systems that have been approved and processed in the last month, and there's not enough. There is not enough. There are thousands of product manufacturers, British-based and international businesses selling into this market. And yes, sadly, I think this does need to be legislated for, because we've had the chance to tidy up our side of the street, and we've for myriad reasons. I think because we've had bigger fish to fry in terms of our day jobs and our P&Ls and everything else, but we haven't. So yeah, I agree with all of Paul Morrell's points in the article, but sadly, I do think there is some legislation needed because we won't get around to doing it otherwise.
yeah, I agree. Let's move on to better and brighter things, shall we? Because, like you say, we need a bit of positivity. So I think we will end on a bit more of a positive track
Should we
with our
sign off with
final.
some skills?
Why not skills to pay the bills?
Well,
Because it looks like we're solving the skills shortage, one very very small drop at a time. So this this piece is in construction management, and it's the FMB pilot aims to build pipeline of site-ready tradespeople, which positive headline, positive news story. What's your take on it?
Let me get my facetiousness out of the way to start with, because it's a lovely story. But yeah, if this sector could solve its problems through pilot schemes, we'd have done it ages ago. It's so many. It frustrates the life out of me. In and of themselves, really, really cool initiatives, but then nothing that seems to scale. Again, back to Burnham and his speech yesterday, and obviously he's done things in the Northwest with his Manchester Baccalaureate, as we touched on previously. And I made a big point yesterday, not only of council housing, but also of technical training as being one of those sort of historic levers to growth and sort of economic improvement. So what's good for the goose would be good for the gander. We keep saying it, that construction is such a big part of the economy, and clearly front and center of the government sort of plans for economic growth, that yeah, it's needed. But But this one kind of addresses something that we've spoken about a little bit, and we've heard quite a bit from industry, that apprenticeships are great and college training courses are great, and initiatives, we've spoken about Open Doors Week and various other things where young people are exposed to the sector. I know there's plenty of people that work in construction that will go to high schools and give talks to kids and all these kinds of things, but doesn't get people site ready, and the people kind of, you can have a certificate, you can have the theoretical training, you can kind of be exposed to some hands-on learning that gets you qualified to a point. It's not the same as those kind of hard and soft skills learned from actually being on the job. And um, so this is it's a bit of a collaborative effect. So Build Academy, which has been developed by the Federation of Master Builders, funded by the CITB, again taking a kicking in recent weeks, but again putting their funding to good use, and delivered by Shooters Hill Sixth Form College. So there's 20 students that have been trained in what they call multi-trade skills, preparing them for work on site. So it's not, you are going to learn this particular thing, whether that's carpentry or plastering or bricking, whatever the course may be. This is the skills to be useful on site from day one, which again, we've spoken at length about the sector saying, that there is clearly demand for these roles, but we need to make sure that we can create something viable for these people so that they're actually healthy jobs onwards from there. All of my facetiousness at the start, this does feel like a useful missing piece in sort of having people that are ready to go, that can be useful, viable employees from day one, and therefore the investment curve maybe isn't quite as steep, particularly for SMEs in sector that are crying out for labour. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this one, Pete?
Yeah, they top and tail it quite well here in saying that FMB members, the organisation, struggle to recruit skilled tradespeople, and they're crying out to find them. And this seems like a really good step in the right direction. I think the missing link there, and we've spoken about it in the past, is having that employment link. I think it was actually King of the North that brought that to our attention from news stories, in that we have to find a way of, it's all good having these apprenticeships, but we have to find a way of finding them full-time roles or roles within organizations. Now, if over half of the FMB's members are struggling to find these skilled tradespeople, it's a bit of a no-brainer to get an association within construction, a training body, to train these people in skills in a working environment like an apprenticeship, or move on to get ready for an apprenticeship. They've covered all the skills that you'd expect, which is really good, because one thing that I feel with education, and I'm not going down that route because that's a black hole we'll never get out of, but one thing that I feel with education is we always put these, we spread ourselves too thin over loads of different disciplines that we might not be that fussed about. But if somebody has a real passion for bricklaying, carpentry, plastering, tiling, painting, decorating, then have a dabble at each one, and then, oh no, this one's for me. Let's do this, and then focus in on that. And I think what the CITB can do, and hopefully are trying to do, is have that focus and let people that are really passionate about it, or just show an interest in it first of all, get involved in it, and they have that comfort of knowing that they will have some kind of role at the end of that education. Because I can only talk from my own experience and my friends' and family's experience, but the one thing that I don't think the traditional education system does very well is get you ready and employable, and have those roles not lined up for you so you can pick and choose, but have that gateway, that door open for you to step into employment easier than it is.
I don't disagree with that. And again, we've spoken before about but it is unique to the construction sector, the volume of SMEs and micro businesses that exist within our supply chain. We've talked about different solutions and different pilot schemes that have been floated for means of solving that, whether that's kind of joined up apprenticeship models and pools of apprentices and all these kinds of things. I think anything that de-risks, think about the unique nature of small businesses versus a large organization. Anything that de-risks an employment opportunity, I think is a really, really good thing. again, Tim Balcon, the chief exec of CITB, notes it in here. It's about day one value and day one employability, and I think that's good for all parties. You want to give these young people that have a passion for a particular skill the confidence that from day one they are contributing. They're not there awkwardly stood around observing. And of course, there's going to be a kind of, when you're brought into an organization, that there is an element of learning curve in kind of culture or in the way that they specifically do things. But if you can add value from day one, I think that's a win for all parties. It makes it easier for the SME to make the leap to employ in the first place, and better for the young person, better for their confidence, and better for them sort of becoming a sort of valuable employee straight out of the gate. So I love it. Hopefully there's some scale to this. Again, let's keep an eye on this as a pilot and see what it does, because it seems like it's going to dovetail quite nicely with what government are talking about.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree, and I'm a huge fan of apprenticeships and the less traditional ways of learning, if you like. I know apprenticeships have been around for years and years, but I'm a huge fan of that kind of learning and education into an employable position. Which leads us on to our takeaways. I think I'll go first, and then I'll let you let you have yours. Mine's quite simple. When something's been agreed upon, when something's been defined, completed, just leave it alone. If decisions are decisions, and we put these stipulations in place for a reason, and we're governed, whether it's right or wrong, in a certain way for a reason. And just because it wasn't the outcome people thought it might be, we seem to have this hang up, which I feel is really holding us back. But a lot of things hold us back. So my takeaway is just leave things be, and you roll your dice, whatever those numbers are, you play with those, and you make the best of that. And that's what we've got to do as an industry to move forward, because there'll always be major things that are going to be stumbling blocks for us.
Yeah, I'd kind of jump on the back of that, mate. I think it's time to get on and do, fundamentally. I would, fresh start, new prime minister, sizable majority in government, chance to do something radical and actually deliver on some of these things, and all that stuff notwithstanding. I think I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but I think my feelings on Brexit aren't positive for what it's worth. Weren't at the time, aren't now. But I'm with you. It is what it is, and I think that and Grenfell have probably, they've removed any paper that was over the cracks of what was there within supply chain for various reasons. And as I say, we don't want economic shocks in the way that we have. We want some stability, if not growth. So I think there's a certain point where you've just got to say, like, have we done enough off the back of any of those things to sort of course correct and improve our lot? And I don't think we have. So that would be my takeaway, is that it's time to get on now.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of which, I think it's time for both of us to get on.
Yeah, let's do it. See you next week.
See you later.